Well, good morning, everyone. It is Sunday, May 31st, 2020, and we are still here in the truck, trying to give some thoughts of grace in lieu of an actual worship service where we might be able to gather together. We're still trying to function in such a way that I can bring the word to God's people, even though we're not able to get together. And hopefully things will loosen up a little bit more in the coming weeks so that we will be able to actually begin to gather together, even if it's outside soon. We'll hopefully be able to do something along those lines with some social distancing guidelines and some protections in place. But at this stage, we're still in the truck and still trying to think through how to bring God's word and speak God's truth to the issues of the day. And the issues of the day are obviously very serious. There's a lot of things that have gone on in the last week which weigh heavy on my heart, and I know weigh heavy on the hearts of people that I love dearly. Seeing that video of George being knelt on by a police officer and killed was tragic. George Floyd deserved better. Seeing the rioting going on is not right either. We as a society deserve better. There are a lot of issues at play, and honestly, as I think through all of these things, there's very little good to say about who we are as a people. Very little good to say about what we have displayed in our past and what we currently display now. And that's not really a surprise. As I posted, I guess a couple of days ago, some of my thoughts initially, really, and I thought through what I posted and how I should say things and everything, because I didn't want to just react. Whenever I just react, I don't say things properly, and that can be dangerous, especially given the current situation. So I wanted to really think through what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. And I wanted to do the same today as well, in looking not just at this situation, but at who we are, why we are who we are, and how do we respond. As Christians, how should we, as God's people, respond to what we see going on around us? How do we respond to our black brothers and sisters who have experienced systemic racism their entire lives? I don't like to say that that's true, but it is. I mean, I've talked with good friends of mine who are older than me that have been through many, many things in life that I have never had to go through. They have experienced things that I never had to experience. I talk to good friends of mine that are younger than me that have been through stuff that I've never had to experience. And it's simply because they're black. And that's not right. That is absolutely wrong. That is sin. That's really how we have to look at it. As Christians, we have to understand that there is a reason, a deep reason, that we are the way we are as a world, as a society, as a people, as a humanity. We are the way we are. And there is a deep-seated reason for that. There's a deep-seated reason why these things keep happening and why these things will keep happening until Christ comes. And that reason is sin. Honestly, God has two expectations from his humanity that he has created. Two expectations, and he's listed them very clearly in the Bible. He's enumerated them in specific cases as you read through the Old Testament and the New Testament, as he's displayed what his expectations are in specific incidents he's come out with. But really they come down to two things that God expects from us. And these were enumerated in the New Testament very clearly. They're enumerated in the Old Testament very clearly. But it was asked of Jesus what the two greatest commandments are. And Jesus said the two greatest commandments are very simple. They're simple to explain and obviously impossible for us to live. The first thing that God expects of us is that we would love him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. That we would place God at the forefront of our minds, that we would be so enraptured with who God is that we are drawn up into an absolute devotion and love for Him. That all that He is all that we need. So that we would love God with all of our mind, our hearts, our minds, our souls, our strength, every fiber of our being. And the second commandment, Jesus said, is just like the first, that we would love our neighbor as ourselves. Now, when you look around you, you see that we violate the second commandment every day of our lives. I mean, look at what's happened. I mean, just the two things I mentioned that have happened in the last week, the death of George Floyd, that was a violation of love for neighbor. There is no reason for that. That was definitely a violation of love for neighbor. The violence that has happened during the protests. Now, I'm not saying the protests are wrong. I'm saying that the violence that has gone on during these protests, in other words, the people that have come in and really taken over the protest, the people that have come in from outside that have taken over the protest and have turned them violent, that is wrong. It's absolutely wrong. The threats made against other police officers, the danger that other police officers now face, is wrong. It is a violation of love for neighbor. We violate that all the time. And the reason we violate our love for neighbor, and actually Paul describes the violation of our love for neighbor in Romans chapter 1. If you want to read the problem with humanity, you go right to Romans 1. He describes us, and here's who we are as a world. Here's who we are as a society. And this was first century, Paul was writing, and the same is true in the 21st century. We are filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. We're whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, and unforgiving, and unmerciful. That's how Paul describes the human race. That's who we are. And if we ever needed more evidence, just turn on the TV and watch the news of what we have experienced. And honestly, what we see is nothing new. I mean, think through our history. We as a nation enslaved an entire group of people because of the color of their skin. We as a nation interned the Japanese in camps during World War II because they were Japanese. We as a nation slaughtered Native Americans when we came over here. The British and French and Spanish colonialism, the European colonialism has devastated nations for years. But those nations weren't, all happy-go-lucky people that had no problems on their own before we ever got there. If you look at the history of the Americas before we even got here, the Aztecs were devastating other groups of people, other Native American people, and had human sacrifice and cannibalism. There was cannibalism in Africa and slavery and all kinds of stuff in Africa. In Asia, there was slavery and there was hatred of people. We as humans have hated each other and killed each other over dirt, over lines in the sand for thousands of years. You can go all the way back to Egypt, enslaving people as they conquered nations, all the way back to ancient Egypt in 2000 BC. We have been the type of people Paul describes in Romans 1. Why is that? Well, the underlying reason that we are as bad as we are is because we hate God. We hate each other who are made in the image of God because we do not love God as we ought. You see, the problem isn't underlying that there is a system of racism or hatred. The problem underlying us isn't that George Floyd was murdered. The problem underlying our society isn't the violence in the protests, the riots and the looting going on. Those are symptoms, and they're bad symptoms, and they show the evil of our hearts. But the evil of our hearts directed at each other is first and foremost a fundamental result that the evil of our hearts is directed at God. You see, Paul in Romans chapter 1, verse 18 tells us that God is angry at us We are ungodly and unrighteous, and his wrath is revealed from heaven against us. And here's what he says: because we suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in us, and God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their hearts. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. You see, the problem, what causes us to become haters of each other, is that first and foremost, we hate God. Turning it around from the great commandment and the second great commandment, Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. If we have an expectation of loving our neighbor, which is what we all want to see. We want to see police officers that police correctly, and people that don't need police officers. And we want to see peaceful protests, and we want to see justice, and we want to see businesses thrive, and we want to see communities lifted up, and we want to see people of all races and all colors and all backgrounds lifted up and benefiting from freedoms and all of these things that we say we want to see. And if we want to see goodness happen to each other, the first thing we need to understand is that we need to love God with all of our hearts. And we will never, ever see a solution to the problems we have with each other if there is not a solution to the problem we have with God. My friends, there have been many debates in the last couple of years amongst conservative Christians and preachers that I listen to and theologians that I listen to on what is the business of the church. What should the church be doing in regards to all of these situations? Should we be politically active? Should we be proclaiming issues of, and there's been even Marxist terms thrown around in these debates and arguments over social justice and this, that, and the other. And there's been some people that have said, no, the job of the church is just to preach the gospel. We must preach the gospel, and that's it. We can't involve ourselves in all of this other stuff. And then there's some that have said, no, part of the gospel is this social justice. And there's been all kinds of debates, and I think these are healthy debates. And I think they're debates we need to have. We need to understand, what should we do as the church in regards to all of this. I think the first thing we need to understand is the primacy of the gospel. We need to understand what the underlying problem is, and the underlying problem is that we are fallen creatures separated from God by our sin, and we need a restoration to our relationship with God. And the only answer we have for that, the only solution to that problem, is Jesus Christ. We can never solve the problem out there in Minneapolis. We can never solve the problem in Chicago. We can never solve the problems in China. We can never solve the problems in our own homes if we do not solve the problem of our hearts being separated from God. And the answer is Jesus Christ. And the answer has to come from God, because we're broken. We're dead. We cannot solve the problem ourselves, but praise be to God, He has. You see, Jesus has come to earth and died on the cross in order to deal with the problem that we have, in order to reconcile us to the Father. And we must simply trust in Him. We must turn from our sins and trust in Jesus Christ. And that deals with the first issue. And then we must, as those who are newly born into the family of God, we must pursue love of God with all of our hearts, with every fiber of our being. We have to give up ourselves and love God. We have to pursue Christ. We have to pursue God Himself. That's the first answer. But that's not all. You see, because if that is what we pursue and it does not impact who we are in our relationship with other people, we're actually lying to ourselves. If we claim to love God and do not love those around us, James says we're lying. The Apostle James says we don't really love God. If we claim to love God and don't love those who are created in the image of God, we don't really love God. And so there has got to be a giving of ourselves in love to others. Now, Jesus dealt with this issue and really what this looks like in a popular parable. He was asked at one point in Luke chapter 10 by a lawyer what good thing this lawyer needed to do. He came up to him and said, "Teacher, what great thing must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, you're a lawyer. What does the law say?" And the lawyer answered, "Well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself." He actually gave the two greatest commandments. And Jesus said, "Yes, that's exactly right. Do this and you will live. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." If you can perfectly love God and perfectly love your neighbor, then you'll make it. While the lawyer seeking to justify himself, that's the way Luke puts it, he wanted to justify himself because he realized, if I got to be careful because I'm not sure I fit this, but I think I do. And so he asked the question, who is my neighbor? In other words, well, okay, who do I have to love as myself? And Jesus told a parable. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan, very well-known parable, so well-known that hospitals have named themselves after the parable. You hear the organization known as Samaritan's Purse, which is an organization that gives, that really gets in there and helps people in need. The story is this, as Jesus told it, that there was a man who was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho. And so he was presumably he was Jewish. He had been there to worship or something. And he was coming from Jerusalem, going down the mountain to Jericho. And as he goes along the way, it's a treacherous road. It's dangerous. There's a lot of curves. There's a lot of rocks and mountainous areas. And it was very dangerous at the time because robbers would hide there and they would attack people. And this man gets attacked by robbers. And he's beaten, they steal all of his stuff, and he's left there to die. Now, it happens that as he's lying in the ditch, a couple of people begin to walk by. And one of them is a Levite and one is a priest. These two walk by. They're on their way, presumably to Jerusalem, on their way to perform their religious duties. The priest was the one who would have been working in the temple, offering the sacrifices on behalf of the people. And the Levite would have been one of the descendants of Levi, one of the sons of Abraham, who actually would have been assistants to the priest. So you have these religious leaders that are on their way to be involved in religious duties. And both of them see this man lying in the ditch. Jesus makes it very clear that they see the man who's in need. And they look at him and go to the other side of the road and stay on their way. They didn't want to be bothered. And then there's a third man who walks by, and he's a Samaritan. Now, the Samaritan stops and sees the man, and rather than walking on his way, he gets down and dirty and helps the guy. He picks the guy up, cleans his wounds, puts him on his own donkey, takes him back to a hotel, puts him up in the hotel with his own funds, pays for doctor visits, and helps this man. Now, the interesting thing about this is how the Jews and the Samaritans felt about each other. You see, the Samaritans were what was known as half-breeds, if you want to put it that way. They were half Jewish, half Gentile. They had been left there by Nebuchadnezzar 400 years earlier when Nebuchadnezzar came into Israel and carted away all the Jews. Some of the Jews had been left. And then some actually came back as well over the years as Medo-Persia conquered Babylon and all of that history there. And as they filtered back into the land, Assyria had left some Gentiles in the land, and Nebuchadnezzar had repopulated the area with some Gentiles. And so you had this group of Gentiles and you have this group of Jews. They had eventually intermarried. And they formed a group of people in the area known as Samaria, and so they became called Samaritans. And they were Jewish and Gentile mixed. Their bloodlines had mixed, so to speak. Well, the Jews absolutely hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans absolutely hated the Jews. There was racial tension. They couldn't stand each other. They did all kinds of things to each other. And part of the land of Israel was above Samaria and part was below Samaria. And you find that the Jews would often go around Samaria to get to the northern part and then go back around Samaria to get to the southern part. It was an animosity that was centuries old and hatred that was horrible. And Jesus uses this Samaritan on purpose. He speaks of this Samaritan as one who would have been hated by the people who were listening to him. And he says, this man stopped and he helped somebody that he had a natural hatred towards and who had a natural hatred towards him. But he saw somebody in need and he took care of him. And Jesus asked the man, after telling this story, he asked the man the question, who do you think was a neighbor to this man in the ditch? And the man responded, he who showed mercy on him. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. If you're a Christian today and you want to know how should I respond to everything that's going on, I'm going to tell you the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus told and say, go and do likewise. I'm going to tell you that you need to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then you need to go out of your way to love the person that is hurting and do things for them. You need to help them. We as Christians should be known as those who care and those who do things for people in need. Now, I talked, I guess it was last week, from James about real religion is visiting the widows and orphans in their distress. We got a lot of widows and orphans in distress. And I'm not talking just about widows and orphans. I'm talking about people who are hurting. I'm talking about, you look at, I'm a white guy, right? Okay. I grew up and I will, my perspective is different from a lot of people in that I will be the first to admit that I'm the son of a police officer. And so that's how I grew up, was the son of a police officer. And my first inclination is to always defend the police. And because I grew up watching my father walk out of the house, and every time he walked out of the house, I was worried he wouldn't come back. That's the reality. It's been in the last really 20 years in speaking to people that have become really close friends of mine who are black. And I know that's cliche. I'm sorry it's cliche, but it's true. That I've listened to them. And I've heard how they've talked about how they had to teach their sons not to walk in their neighborhood after dark. Not because they were concerned about danger of crime, but because they might be thought to be somebody they weren't. Maybe they would be considered armed and dangerous just because they were black. That's a reality that they grow up with. I've talked to those same sons and daughters of these friends and listened to them and heard them describe how they were pulled over for doing nothing, or how they were actually attacked in their own neighborhood, and the danger that they grew up with just because of who they were. And as a white person, I need to understand that. As a Christian, what I need to do is be compassionate. What I need to do is reach out and care for those who are hurting, no matter what color they are. As a Christian, I need to love my neighbor as I already love myself. You don't ever read in the Bible where God commands you to love yourself. I remember hearing messages over the last 40 years when I understood them, from people that would take these commandments, the greatest commandment and the second greatest commandment, when they talk about love your neighbor as you love yourself, they would start to say statements like, well, in order to really love your neighbor, you have to begin loving yourself. And then they would go off on a whole tangent on the fact that we don't rightly love ourselves and we need to love ourselves better in order to really love our neighbor. I don't think that's a problem. I don't see the Bible ever give us a command to love ourselves. I don't see in the Bible where it ever tells us that we have a problem loving ourselves. I see in the Bible where the Bible clearly says that we love ourselves too much. and we need to begin looking outside of ourselves. I mean, Philippians chapter 2 doesn't say that you need to think more highly of yourself in order to think more highly of someone else. No, it says that you better put yourself underneath somebody else, because you think too highly of yourself now, and you better stop it. And you better think more highly of other people. In other words, you already love yourself too much. Stop loving yourself so much. Turn around and love other people. Jesus tells us that we need to go and do likewise. In other words, just like he said of the Good Samaritan, who went out of his way, sacrificed of his own needs, sacrificed of his own personal things, sacrificed of his time, sacrificed of his money, sacrificed of his own reputation in order to care for somebody who was beaten down. We've got to do that. If we want the gospel to go forth from our doors as a church, as a community of people who claim to love the Lord, then we need to love other people. If we ever want to see a change in our society, it's got to start right here. It's got to start with us looking in the mirror and saying, as a Christian, I've got to confess that I don't love God the way I ought. I don't love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength. I know I don't, and the reason why I know I don't is because I'm selfish. And I'm self-centered, and I don't love my neighbor as myself. My friends, if we want to see a change in our society, it's got to begin in our own hearts. We must change. We must ask God to change us so that we love him more, and so that we then turn around and love others more. And that love is shown in action. This is the prescription. If we want to stop seeing people killed like George Floyd, if we want to stop seeing riots and looting in our communities, if we want to stop seeing sexual sin and rampant murder and crime and envy and deceit, it's got to start with us confessing our own sins as Christians, admitting that we fail to love God as we ought, and that we fail to love our neighbor as ourselves, and then repenting of that sin. Confessing and repenting, that means turning from that sin. That means making a change. That means coming to God and seeking to love him more, and asking him to help us to love others in word and in deed. And then sharing with them why we are now different. The difference that the gospel makes. The difference that Jesus makes. My friends, we've seen humanity be evil for thousands of years. But don't be discouraged. Love casts out all fear. God conquers Satan. We can make a difference because the gospel makes a difference. We will make a difference because God is more powerful than sin. I hope you have a great week. Take these words to heart. Consider how you need to change in order to love God more, and consider what you can do to love others. God bless you. Have a wonderful week.